I'm S.A. Bradley, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror, where I remind you that you used to love horror movies, and you secretly still do. Hello, everybody. This is S.A. Bradley, and I'm hoping that you're hearing this voice coming out of the darkness on Halloween, All Hallows Even. I think you may have realized by now that this holiday means a lot to me. And October itself has become a super busy time of the year. Probably not a surprise to many of you. I've been doing a lot of traveling, going to conventions, speaking the fine word, trying to spread the gospel about how horror is the most beautiful of all of the genres out there. But of course, that takes some of my time away from other things, and it's been really, really difficult for me to be able to balance all the things that I'm trying to do. I am in the midst of writing not one but two books. One is an interview book, and the other is, well, it's about horror, what I love about it, and what I think creates fandom out of it, and what we love, what we hate, what perhaps we love to hate. All of that stuff is going to be in that book. But it has made my time management crazy, and I have felt the pressure of trying to be there for everybody in different aspects. So there have been times where I have gone on podcasts and interviews for people who really had the passion and needed to have somebody to talk to. I've been at a few haunted houses volunteering my time. And, of course, if anybody knows me personally, they know that I go out of my way to make a great big haunted house. Now, all of this is my passion, right? Everything comes back to horror, and everything comes back to how much horror has given me in giving me what I consider a happy life, a healthy life, a life worth living. A life full of play and passion, and that is what I have gotten out of this. So I know that you've all been waiting for a new show, and it's been killing me not getting it out in time. I'm doing some writing assignments, and it is something that has been driving me a little bit crazy. So I wanted to do something a little bit more personal today. I wanted to do something a little bit more for you, for listening, for going through all of this. I wanted to open a vein or two and let you in a little bit more on why horror and Halloween and haunted houses matter so much to me. And I'm also going to read something to you. I did write a short story that's in an anthology, and it's out there. The name of the anthology is Shattered and Splintered. The story is called The RELEQUARIANS, and I decided it might be good to read you a horror story as we end up passing through this day into the witching hour. But first, let me talk a little bit about why this matters so much. You know, I have been spending the entire month of October on the roof of my house, crawling on my hands and knees through mulch and dirt, putting together big pieces of plastic that look like bones and skeletons and monsters and creepy crawlies, and lighting them as if it's a Broadway musical that needs to be lit. I've been doing all of this for the full month, exorcising demons while doing it. I curse a lot while I'm doing it. My wife has to consistently come out and ask me if I'm still having fun, because if you heard me, you wouldn't think I was having fun. But the reality is I am chasing away old things that still haunt me. I'm building up this weird castle of creativity that may not mean much to other people, but now I'm starting to find out it does matter. Turning my house into a haunted house has been something that I've been doing since I've bought the property. So it's been about 20 years. And it started rather modestly with whatever I had left after paying mortgage. I put into bones. I find that one of my favorite things to do is get a bag of plastic bones and create some kind of monster out of it, create some kind of skeleton, some kind of collage, whatever it might be. And I put that out, and at that time, we had a few children across the street, and what I found was that they were really excited by what I was doing. I was opening this really weird portal of creativity, curiosity that normally wasn't on the block. And it happens, of course, around Halloween, but of course I do it at Christmas and stuff like that as well. But Halloween always really captured the kids. Most of them were boys, so it's no surprise that the boys really vacillated towards this. What I found was that they really started looking forward to it, and one of the things that I had done while they were still young all those years ago was I would wait till October 1st, and I would notice that they started hanging out, the neighborhood kids, around the house, down the block a little bit, just carefully watching. I would get home from work, and I would go in, and I had one decoration that I always put up first, the Grim Reaper. He's just on a shepherd's pole. He's chintzy. He's cheap. He's been around for 20 years, so he has been sewn and glued, a whole bunch of stuff over and over again. But at one point, I used to walk out with a look of determination in my face, and I would pound him into the ground with one big thrust of my hand, and then stepping on the shepherd's pole and pushing it in with my heel, and the kids would come running. And they would study it. And it was so fun watching these kids just forget about the world around them and enter into this strange place that is still their reality, but also part of their imagination. The imagination had somehow ripped through this permeable curtain that we have in our world, where all the fun thoughts are stored in the background around all the stuff that we do in our world, and kids can access that very quickly. And as soon as they would see that Grim Reaper, they would come out. And that has been giving me memories that have meant a lot to me, and has kept me doing this for 20 years. And weirdly enough, this year the newspaper came and found the house and took photos, and now I've got people of all ages coming at all times of the night, driving by, looking at this reliquary that I have made for the spirit world, for Halloween, for being scared, for being a kid. And it is a reliquary because it has power for those kids, sure. For some of the adults, yes. But it has a lot of power for me. So, how much power does it have? Well, you know, when I'm talking about the people in the neighborhood, I'm not necessarily sure how high they are on the whole thing. I think they enjoy it. The neighbors tolerate it. But when it starts coming together and the lights come on, it does have some kind of strange power. We had a rather unfortunate incident that became kind of fun last 2 weeks. I guess it was 2 weeks ago. The house across the street from us was broken into. It had been laying vacant for a while. The family that lives there had to travel for their work to China. So they were not in the country. They had paid someone to watch the house, to keep upkeep. As a month or so turned into a year, that person hadn't been doing the job nearly as much. The neighborhood around us, specifically one of my close friend neighbors, was cleaning the house because he didn't want anybody coming in and squatting or trying to break into it. And of course, the inevitable did happen. Somebody broke in. And so the house was found open. And it was late at night when this happened. And who's across the street hanging skeletons, putting up lights on the roof of his house, climbing up telephone poles, but me, putting up my reliquary. And suddenly the police are everywhere. So there's a moment where I'm not sure. Am I doing things that are now no longer legal? I have no clue. So I walk down and I nod and I find out that the house had been broken into. Everything seems to be going okay. We're asking questions of the police. The police are asking questions of us, asking to take a look at the video that we have for our security system. We have bupkis. There's nothing to give them. And I notice that the policemen are doing their duty inside of the house. But when they come out, they're crossing the street. And they're standing in front of the house, staring. And staring. And it's not just one. There are now 4 police officers in front of my house, staring. And I walk over, and one of them looks over and says, "Are you the homeowner?" And I say, "Yes, I'm the homeowner." And he goes, "I've got to tell you, I'm all over this town, you know, and it's about 100,000 people." And he's like, "I'm all over this town, and I've got to tell you, this house is the best house for Halloween. And I have driven past here late at night watching you, and every so often I thought I'd stop, but you looked busy and tired, so I thought I would leave you alone." Makes me very happy to hear this. the thing that's really fun is that he has forgotten he's a police officer just for a few moments. He's no longer in this town that we're in, per se. He is somewhere in the Vale. He's somewhere in between. Somehow this thing in front of him, all this silly stuff, has channeled something from his childhood, channeled something from his nightmares and his dreams and his fantasies. He's allowing a sense of play while behind us is a crime scene. Without anybody getting into any kind of trouble, I will say that the officers kept coming by, and as it became nothing more than paperwork, they started to stare, and they started to ask me questions. The question I always get is, how long does it take for you to do this? It takes about 3 weeks, anybody who's asking. Usually 3 weeks to a month. It depends. I get obsessed. I cannot stop. I am that person that you hear about, that they say the artist has to abandon the art, not finish it. I tend to be that, and that is why I'm talking to you now, as we are on Halloween. But what I saw from those police officers was this look of awe and fun, and one of them kind of pointing up at this spider that I have hanging off of the city municipal telephone pole with a corpse next to it covered in floss. And he goes, Sarge, look at the big spider. And Sarge, look at the big spider is probably the last thing I would have expected the police officers in my town to do. So it was really fun, and that's the transformative thing that I notice. For me, it goes a little bit deeper. It goes a little bit darker. It goes into a place of reserve. It comes from a place of spite. It comes from a place of rejuvenation and reclamation and standing your ground. Halloween is a one war for me. Halloween is in my genes. It is in my heart, it is in my soul, and that is because at one point I was not allowed anywhere near it. So some of you know that I was involved in a fundamentalist cult as a child, and this was in the 70s. And as much turmoil as we have now, the 60s and the 70s were quite similar. There was a lot of fear. There was a lot of anger. There was a lot of violence. As a child in an elementary school in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, there were several times that we were evacuated from our elementary school ages, our classes from first grade to sixth grade. We were evacuated because of bomb threats. There were several bomb threats. Bomb threats were something that was kind of around in the East Coast of the United States during the 70s. The Black Panthers were on the rise. College violence was happening. The Kent State had happened. We're about to lose Vietnam. We're escaping Saigon. The President of the United States is under major investigation for a crime. Families are falling apart. All of this stuff is happening, and my family finds this religion that says none of this is your fault. As long as you follow a few simple rules, and there are many rules, you'll be okay. So my family was involved in this religion that asked a lot of them, which meant it asked a lot of me. And it somehow fed into our greatest fears. My father had many fears that are unfortunate, prejudices, all sorts of things that are shameful. And this religion, some of it abated, and much of it it fed. One of the great ones was that this system of things, this government, this culture, this world of secular beliefs was going to end, and it may kill us all before that. In the 70s, the religious were already talking about death squads of atheists running around, making it so that you could not believe in your God, say your God's name. This was all believed at that time. They had proof. Of course, all the proof was in fascist countries or warlord areas of Africa. But it could happen here, and that was the clarion cry. There was this belief inside of this religion that everything in the Bible was true, everything was absolute, everything was real. There was no allegory here. there was a beast coming out of the sea with a harlot on its back with diadems of 7 crowns. That was real. It happened in front of John on the island of Patmos. This is what I was growing up with, already having some abuse in my life, having some many fears. And suddenly this religion is saying that demons walk the earth. Demons are right next to you, especially if you are someone who is somewhat chaste, but is faltering, questioning. The demons cannot wait to get you, and they want to possess you. To this day, the scariest story that I can listen to, that you can tell me, is a demonic possession one, second only to ghosts. And both of those have to do with being prey, and that no one will believe you when you're prey. You're being stalked by something that no one can see, but it has all the fun it can with you. Now, both of the ghost story and the possession story taper off once everybody realizes, yes, there is a possession, because then there's always some kind of cure. There's a cure for being possessed. There's a cure for being haunted. And it just takes a few strangely similar steps. Every movie will tell you the same thing to get out of it. But the fear was the real life thing of being attacked and possessed. And I was surrounded by people who told me constantly that they had seen demons. It would be things like they're on a bus and they realize they're being stared at, and they look over and there's an older man in dirty clothes staring at them, and he has no eyes. And I would hear this as a kid, and it would scare me. And a friend of the family said that at one point he had woken up in bed, and he looked, and there was this person who looked maybe a little Asian, maybe a little alien in some other way, maybe asexual, couldn't tell if it was male or female, sitting in a yellow raincoat in a chair across from the bed, staring without eyes, and slowly getting up and walking towards him while he was laying in bed. And he just said prayers and kept saying prayers out loud, and when he looked, the demon was gone. I was told of Ouija board use, that someone had used a Ouija board inside of their house. They said the name of the family so that I could not believe that it was fake. And they had put this Ouija board in a hamper, a clothes hamper, forgetting about it. Every time they would walk by this closet, this door where this hamper was, they would hear their name called out, just conversationally. Helen, John. And they'd look around, and there'd be no one there. If they walked further away, it would call after them, like you would call someone if it was time to eat. And I'd hear this as a kid, and it would scare me. And they said, of course, they had found that there was a Ouija board there. They brought the elders in to pray heavily and then take it outside and burn it. And the story goes that the fire got out of control and took part of their barn down with it, which is why the barn burnt down and had something to do with the Ouija board. They believed in all sorts of idolatry, that idolatry had this power, this insane power. And so praying hands and crucifixes, things that other people thought were okay, good luck charms, 4-leaf clovers, all of this stuff, anything that had some kind of special power of wish and myth was dangerous and would bring demons to you. Of course, I got away from this religion, but it took some time. And when I was a child, I was denied all of the things that most children had that fed their imagination, fed their sense of community. The only community I was allowed was the community of that church. And they kept me with everyone who believed the same exact thing consistently. They told me the story of the system of things out there, how the world was coming to an end, how you might like your friends, they seem nice, but they're really doomed. Maybe you can save them if you talk enough about God and bring them into the fold. But the reality was we were watching corpses walking around, and at any time this war in the sky was going to happen. This is the kind of thing that I was brought up with. And I had a lot of nightmares. And on top of that, my family was unstable. There was a divorce that was happening. My mom was mentally unstable, rather young to have a kid. That didn't help, but I believe that she was undiagnosed with manic depression. And so there was a lot of very, very, very terrifying things that were happening to me as a child. Sometimes being thrown out of the house, sometimes just hearing screaming and crying inside of the house, hiding from whatever weirdness was going on. I'd have things like my mother telling me, in tears, holding on to me, telling me to pray very hard, and telling me that if someone had told me to curse God, or they were going to kill my mother in front of me, that I should let them kill her. These were things I was hearing at, I think I was 8. I was also told if I ever stopped loving my mom, she would have someone cut her head off and mail it to me. So it may be that I had a little bit of a predisposition to horror. Now, I say all of this, and I am over all of this, by the way. I have found salvation. I have found my way out of all of this. But early, when I was stuck in that house, and I was not a believer because I was surrounded by kids who came up with really good points, and I didn't know if I trusted these people. And then 1975 happened, and the world did not end. And the family just continued on with this religion. Everybody continued on with this religion except for me. But I had to stay in it because I was in that house until I was able to escape it. So here I am stuck, a non-believer, scared to death. What I do believe in, though, are demons, and that there are things in the dark that are after everyone. I believe in curses. I believe in evil eyes. All of that stuff, because I think that it can be used to possess me. So I can't find an outlet, and I do. I find it in comic books, horror comic books, the Boris Karloff comic books, creepy, all of these wonderful things, House of Mystery. I had Alfred Hitchcock's Spellbinders in Suspense. I had the classics on tape, classics that were illustrated. I think they were called Classics Illustrated, where they would do Ivanhoe and things like that, Moby Dick, in comic book form. And of course I had Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And I had Frankenstein. And these were terrifying to me to see in comic book fashion. But they also were very freeing for me. So, horror is already allowing my imagination to escape. I'm opening up these books, opening up these comic books, drawing this stuff, finding when I can watch horror movies, that I have opened up a hole in this reality which is terrifying and so oppressive and so all-encompassing and so brutal, that I am finding this area where I am able to go into this realm. I am able to find my way through these veils and get into my imagination, get into my head, find myself a creative outlet, find myself a way to connect with others. That's what horror started to do. And one of the things that was really important was a haunted house in my neighborhood. So there was this family. I'll name them. I don't know if they're around anymore. I don't know if their kids still do it. The Antolics. They had a 3-story house in my hometown that they decorated like crazy for Christmas, but they went absolutely crazy for Halloween. I was not allowed to do any kind of trick-or-treating. In fact, our family was the one that had all the lights off, and we sat inside the house in the dark as the doorbell is being rung, and people are knocking on the door, and kids are laughing, and there are shadows of pointed hats and devil's spears and things like that coming from the lights outside, and we sat quietly, waiting for them to go away. Boy, I'll tell you, how could I not love siege movies, right? So anyway, all of this is happening. I'm not allowed to go to Halloween parties. I can't trick-or-treat. We do not decorate. We sit in the darkness on Halloween. Halloween is a time of stress for my family, but not for me. It's a place of freedom for me. One of the places that I would find freedom was at the Antolics house outside. The one thing that my dad would give me that had to do with the holiday of Halloween was he would let me go look at the decorations at this house. And that would be something that would last maybe a half an hour, maybe longer if he would let me. I would take in every piece of decoration that there was. I would look at the lighting. They had a music box with a mirror in it, and they took out the dancer and they put a small severed head inside of it. And I would look at that severed head and I thought it was real. And I would look at all the cuts that were on it. I would look at the ghosts having tea in the backyard, lit only by black lights. I would look at the ghosts. At one point, they used to get their kids to dress up as scarecrows and lay on their Volkswagen Beetles. And when people would come close enough, they would jump up and grab the people, and people would scream. And it was back in the time when you could jump up and grab people and let them scream and not have the authorities immediately upon you. I would stay at that house. It was magic. It was my interior mind shown exterior. It was my version of expressionism. This is where my thoughts were coming out into this creative place, and someone else was doing that for me. They were the visitation that was happening at the prison I was in. They were this tea in the Sahara. They gave me what I could not do for myself, and I said, this is freedom. I looked forward every year to them putting that on, even when I was a teenager. And my friends would be like, why do we come over to this place? And it's because it held a lot of power for me. It was a reliquary in and of itself. It was a holy item. It was something that had power. It was like holding a good luck charm. It was, this is what is going to get me through the storm this month. I loved Halloween. I loved Halloween because everybody thought like me for one day. Everybody believed, it seemed, that monsters walked the earth, that they stalked after you, and you had to be cautious, and the darkness was full of all sorts of terrors. I used to hide in bushes and watch the kids come by, and sometimes I got found and they would chase me and I would run, and it felt as if these were monsters walking the earth. And there was a very big chill and thrill that I got when that kind of thing would happen. It was one of the things that got me walking at night. Halloween parties didn't happen. I wasn't allowed to go to Halloween parties when they were happening in school. So much power was given to Halloween through negative projection. My family and that church has no idea how much fetishization they had created in the holiday of Halloween. They were making me a Halloween lover for life. All through my adult life, I decorated for Halloween. Even when I was in the military, I just put a couple lights up, whatever I could inside of that barracks, inside of apartments, whatever it was. And in my mind, I said, you know what I'm going to do? When I get a house, I am going to put this together as a great decorated haunted house. It's going to be the talk of the area because someone needs it. Someone needs this house like I needed it. This is repaying in its way. It's also reclamation. All the pain, the terror that I felt as a child, all of the fear of demons, all of that stuff goes into those decorations. All the creativity that was frittered away in the lost years of my life, where it was my fault that I did not attain a lot of things because I gave up. I did not know how to leave a cult and have a good, solid life. I drifted for a while. All of that stuff. I now have this house and I'm reclaiming all of that. And I find that it is the time for this. You know, I have not gone outside of the house and stood out front working on things without 3 or 4 or 5 cars coming by yelling out, I love your house, this is fantastic, thank you so much. But I have also had many people stop and talk to me and tell me how much this matters to the community. Who would think that? Why would people stop to tell me that? Why do people get this look in their eyes when they just see how much work goes into it? The more I say 3 weeks it takes to do, the more powerful it gets, the more they fall in love. They fall in love with the passion. They fall in love with the thing that is so alive and vibrant in me, and is so alive and vibrant in you. It is that ability to imagine. It is that ability to take this world that we live in, which is full of all sorts of ghoulies and ghosties and long-legged beasties wearing red and blue ties, making all these rules for us, whatever it might be. These monsters cannot reach us when we are in these places, these reliquaries, these special temples. I am proud to have one, and I am so glad that so many people love them. I know that there are others, and we talk when we see each other. This is when I meet my community. This is when I find my neighbors. This is when my neighbors find me. This weird, weird thing of how much we long to play. How much we long to be supernatural. To be more than nature. Be more than the nature in front of us. Be more than the bland world wants us to be. Lets us break through this veil. So why don't we do that? Why don't we break through this veil? Happy Halloween. I am here for you. And I'm so glad that you're still here for me. So, let me give you a story. You've been so kind to sit and listen to me all these years. And, I have a story that I wrote that I'm kind of happy with. And I figured, why not? We love stories, ghost stories, and this is a ghost story, folks. It is called The Reliquarians. There are 2 things you need to know. 1, a fire is conjured, not started. 2, it's all the same fire. I have always had an uncanny connection to fire. As a child, I'd watch the yellow flame dance atop the tapered white candle perched on the table during Christmas dinner. The luminous creature was not at rest. It was a prisoner of the candle, and it paced the liquefied tip. When folks passed near, the flame leaned in, stretching, trying to hitch a ride. This flickering creature raged against containment as if a group of inexperienced teenagers unwittingly trapped it in a chalk circle during a seance. Most of all, the fire raged against its hunger, and it was always hungry. Once, I was left unattended at a New Year's Eve party. As I stood vigil over the spirit trapped in its wax cell, a nearby stack of feathery cocktail napkins trembled. The flame snapped in the draft to draw my eye to it. My gaze locked into the shimmering yellow center, and I felt something aware of me. The being called me without words, seducing me with the promise of unknown rewards. It implored me to pick up a napkin. I held the napkin near the candle, and for a moment the flame rubbed against it like a purring cat. The flame spontaneously quadrupled in size as it sprinted around the edges of the paper. The sudden combustive brightness froze me in reverent awe, as if I glimpsed the flash of a beast. I felt the warmth against my fingers, and I inhaled sharply. This destruction was horrible, and it was beautiful. And then, in an instant, it leaped to my forefinger and burned me. I dropped the flaming napkin to the floor and stamped it out onto the carpet while I sucked on my wounded finger. I looked at the candle. The flame was still there, intact and unchanged, present in 2 places simultaneously. I had been so easy to use. I was mesmerized, defenseless to turn away when the glimmering presence beckoned me, and it bit into me, greedy from hunger and indifferent to my suffering. I felt betrayed. I knew it wanted to devour me and make me a human sacrifice, and yet, when the fire called out to me while I lay in bed, my wounded finger was a vibrating divining rod that yearned to be close to the warm glow. When I shut my eyes, I saw the flame inside my head. A part of me was now fire. My finger throbbed and I tossed in my bed. I fought the impulse to sneak downstairs and relight that candle. A voice in my head tried to convince me that the pain would stop if I did. I slept very little. By morning, the throbbing was gone. What lingered was a red welt on my finger, and I had fire on the brain. My childhood home was across the street from a firehouse. I began spending my afternoons staring in awe at the trucks, an old red 1968 Hahn custom pumper and a lime yellow American LaFrance P8 parked in the garage bay. One day, I was there when the alarm sounded. The rebel yell of klaxons split the air. Firefighters appeared wearing thick armor and helmets adorned with Maltese crosses. The diesel engines growled to life and the pavement under me shivered. There was a department store fire downtown. My father drove us out to watch the blaze on my insistence. The inferno had the 3-story building clenched in its jaws, dark orange teeth jutting out of the windows. I watched the firefighters fearlessly enter the beast's open mouth. The black smoke could be seen for miles and turned midday to dusk where we stood. As I stared into the blast furnace at the store's entrance, I suddenly felt a familiar presence, keenly aware of me, staring hungrily back at me. It's the same creature, I said to myself. I could feel my finger throbbing. And then the water cannon on the truck punched into the center of that white-hot gaze and broke the spell. I could feel the demon retreat into the recesses of the building, wounded but far from defeated. My father grew bored, and he drove us home. I waited on my porch until the firefighters returned to their station hours later, reeking of smoke and painted with soot and sweat. I knew in my soul that I would join their crusade. I became an official mascot at the station. When I didn't go away, the assistant chief asked me to help him lower and fold the flag at the end of each duty day. I asked him questions during our ritual. What is it like to go into a burning house? Scary, but if we remember our training, we're okay. What's the best thing about being a fireman? The assistant chief thought for a moment. When you help people who can't help themselves, there's no higher calling than to serve. We give ourselves a service. The skin of the assistant chief's face was a dark red turtleneck that contrasted with his pale face. Years earlier, a kerosene heater ignited and exploded near him during a fire. The flaming oil engulfed him for only a few seconds, but it was enough to brand his chest and neck with 2nd and 3rd degree burns. In first aid class, I learned the rule of 9s, the method to determine the amount of body surface that's burned. I calculated he burned 18 to 27% of his body. He was back on the job in 3 months. I started my official training when I became a teenager. They called me Jeep, which stood for just enough education to pass. I swept floors, polished truck chrome with Never Dull, and learned how to flat load 5-inch supply hoses into the pumper bed. Every firefighter had a tool or a skill that was their specialty. They were as solemn as priests in their vocation and trained their fellow brothers. My specialty became the SCBA, the self-contained breathing apparatus. I learned everything I could about the MSA Ultralight 2 Pressure Demand SCBA, because to me, the air pack gave us superpowers. Sure, our Nomex turnout bunkers were dragon scales that shield us from the flames, but the compressed air tanks breathed for us when the beast poisoned the oxygen to kill us long before we got near the heat. I pored over the specs. I touched every O-ring, bellows, and gasket. I preached the air pack gospel. Most importantly, I taught my team how to survive a disaster. I showed how to ride the bypass knob if the mainline air malfunctioned or breathe directly off the bottle if the hose broke. And I showed how to use a jacket sleeve as a last-ditch air filter if the bottle ran out before getting to safety. These solutions weren't foolproof, but they were better than dying, and death was part of the game. Every aerosol can is a projectile missile, camping stoves were grenades, magnesium car brakes were lava that no water could extinguish. Something as simple as fertilizer stored next to a lawnmower oil became dynamite near an open flame. Our most profound, most horrible fear was burning alive. The end we all feared the most was the one we openly courted every time we answered a call. The old-timers spoke about fire the same way old sailors talked about the sea, as a living being, a dangerous and erratic goddess. Some told of fire leaping across the street to another roof. Some witnessed fires crawl along ceilings that drop behind hand-lined teens and burn their hoses. Others swore they watched a conflagration advance against the wind just to burn the truck at the hydrant. You can learn everything there is to know about this job, but if the fire wants you, it will change the rules just to get you. This God loves to collect firefighters. God. Fire isn't an element. It is a god that eats elements. It traps air, earth, and heat in a murderous triangle to maintain a form on this plane. Amoral and hungry, this god has nothing but wrath for anything it touches. No sacrifice is big enough for its appetite. We brazenly confront the malignant spirit and try to chase it away from its feast. Eventually, when mortals cross gods, there are consequences. Every firehouse has a shrine to the consequences. Ours is a glass cabinet outside of my chief's office. It contains shadow boxes for brother firefighters lost in the line of duty, helmets, badges, and folded flags surrounding portraits of men in uniform. Totems. Every shift change, the company stood at attention in front of this glass cabinet, this shrine, this reliquary. After everything that happened to me, I now understand that these remnants were holy objects, that this tradition of taking a moment to honor the dead charged them with power. There is power in both life and death, but there are more realms, more states of being than just life and death. I remember everything that happened that night. I heard the hiss of the intercom before the alarm sounded, and I stepped into the boots of my turnout bunkers before the fluorescent lights in the bunk room charged. The call was a structural fire in a residential area. My fellow crew members kept pace as we donned our jackets and helmets without breaking stride to the back of our pumper. The bells of our MSA packs rang as we charged our regulators of air. I had been the nozzleman in at least a dozen fires. That supernatural presence was waiting for me there every time. Hungry to unite with me, part of me was now fire. But I used that connection to sense when to strike, exploiting our intimate bond vindictively. We were the first truck on the scene. We hooked the 4.5-inch hose to the nearby hydrant. I jumped off the back with the 1 3/4-inch hose slinking out behind me, and I advanced towards the house. I was on the hand line, first in, which is how I liked it. It was a modest 2-story home. The front door was closed, and the picture window glowed an eerie orange. Black and brown smoke billowed out of the eaves under the dark sky. People might be trapped inside. The crew chief and the door firefighter checked for signs of backdraft while they carefully sunk a Halligan tool into the wooden door jamb. The handline stiffened with water and bucked under my arm like a dog avoiding a bath. I gripped the handle and I held my position. The door belched open and a thick column of black smoke escaped. No fireball. The rescue team crouched at the doorway, restless as Rottweilers, waiting for us to open a path to search and rescue. I crawled in first, with my crew chief close behind, looking over my shoulder while the lineman wrestled the hose forward. We were pilgrims approaching the Madonna of Fatima on our hands and knees. The temperature near the floor reaches between 100 and 200 degrees, and heat rises. So to stand up would melt your helmet, mask, and bunkers directly to your body. The sound inside was a cacophony of exploding hairspray cans, spalling sheetrock, and the jet engine roar of the fire that shrouded itself in an impenetrable black smoke curtain. We were deaf and blind, as always, when we entered. The crew chief slapped my shoulders to indicate the direction to spray water or tugged hard on my bunkers to stop me. I felt 2 firm hits on top of my helmet telling me to hit the ceiling with water. A vast and penetrating steam cloud spread through the room when the water jet touched the ceiling. The mist blanket knocked down the smoke screen, and the room came into sharp focus. There were 3 distinct hot spots. One was an engulfed sofa, another was the room's left wall, and the third was a bonfire rising from the floorboards at the rear, blocking the lintel to the next room. As soon as the steam settled, the rescue team crawled past, hugging the walls and sliding further into the room. A slap on the right shoulder had me turn the water on the roiling sofa. A slap on my left shoulder had me soaking the inflamed corner. The drenchings temporarily knocked down the hot spots, and the rescue team moved beyond them. The room filled up with gray extinguishment smoke. I turned the nozzle to the ceiling again, and as the steam knocked down the smoke, I swiveled towards the bonfire. As the steam curtain dropped to reveal the room, the column of flame was no longer there. In its place was a figure dressed in full firefighter gear. It was standing straight up amid the firestorm, staring back at me from behind its air mask. I gasped, making the regulator hiss extra air into my lungs. My first thought was that someone on the rescue team panicked and stood up. But the form stood there blithely, and by now it should have, burst into terrible flames and dropped lifelessly to the ground. Instead, the figure pulled a small crash axe from its equipment belt and moved purposefully around the lintel into the next room, daring me to follow. An orange glow intensified on the other side of that wall. My crew chief slapped me hard on my back and snapped me out of it. A canopy of flame spread across the ceiling. I doused the rollover, and one of the rescue team disappeared around that corner into the next room towards that orange glow. My heart jumped. I blasted a stream of water into the next room, and I moved forward. Flare-ups were everywhere, and I beat them back. I was locked in a hypnotic, instinctual, violent dance, choking out my enemy. I cleaved my way towards the next room. Unexpectedly, I felt a punch to my right thigh. I stopped moving, and I was hit from the back as if my crew chief had collided with me. It got very bright around me. The intense light made me dizzy. I felt the sensation of ice pressing on the bare skin of my thigh, and then it immediately transformed into a stinging pain as deep as my fibula. Muscle and meat spasmed. I looked down, and I saw something impossible. Somebody's leg draped over my thigh, and another leg wrapped around my lower trunk. But these legs, these appendages, they were made of flame. Simultaneously, a blazing arm wrapped tightly across my chest. I was cradled from behind, tight as a python, and I felt a head nuzzle into the back of my neck. The beast had me in a sick lover's embrace. I knew the terror of what was happening to me. The bone-deep pain was everywhere. My mouth vibrated with involuntary screams. Every muscle in my body rippled to get away from the horror. I could feel fat bubbling within me. Abruptly, water was everywhere, and gloved hands dragged me outside. Water continued to anoint me, but I couldn't feel it. My damaged body reached its pain limit and temporarily shut off the receptors. My air mask, which spared my lungs from certain broiling, was pulled off me. It was gooey. Some of it dripped in my eyes. EMTs carried me and held my head so I couldn't look down. They slid me into the ambulance and started intravenous drips and covered my body with sterile sheets soaked in saline solution. They told me that the roof had fallen on top of me and that I had received some bad burns, but we were only minutes away from the hospital burn unit. They told me to stay awake until we arrived. I began to count. Right arm, including the hand, 9%. Right leg, 18%. My fear rose as I passed the 30% mark, the line where burns could prove fatal. Posterior trunk, 18%. I climbed towards the 50% line where chances of survival dropped quickly. The ambulance rocked and rumbled as the driver sped towards the hospital. Every bump the vehicle hit made my stomach flip. The medic asked me my name. I didn't know. I was about to tell him so when I noticed the orange glow outside the small square windows in the ambulance's rear doors. At first I thought it was light bleed from the red traffic lights we blew through, but the glow didn't fade. The light flickered on the glass. It seemed as if this source was getting closer. Suddenly the back door swung open. A figure, a human-shaped fireball, was perched on the bumper. The creature was in fireman's turnout gear, complete with an MSA pack and a helmet. Behind the air mask visor was a rolling blaze of flame where the face should be, and the air hose swung loose and vomited glowing embers out of the end. The wind from the speeding vehicle made the body an inferno. The helmet glowed like hot coals on a burning log. The EMTs did not acknowledge the beast, the open doors, or the wind. They continued to save my life, oblivious to the chaos. I tried to scream. I tried to get their attention, but I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. My heart rattled in my chest. I looked on in horror, helpless, as the creature slowly pulled itself into the cabin. It stretched out a gloved hand, orange tongues of fire pouring out of the cuff and sleeve. The fingertips were 5 red-hot glowing pokers. The orange glow from the conflagrated hand radiated off the medics' faces, but they noticed nothing. The beast was now close enough that I could see the swirling firestorm clearly behind the monster's visor. It was the same presence I felt from that candle so many years ago. The immolated glove hovered above the saline-drenched sheets and wiggled its glowing figures casually, playfully. And then the index and middle fingers touched the wet sheets with a sizzle. The demon pressed those 2 fingers into the sheet over my stomach and deliberately walked them up towards my chest, each finger step accompanied by a hiss. It held the fingers in one spot for a few seconds, and suddenly a puff of smoke rose from the cloth. I could feel the heat. My God, I was going to burn again. The EMT looked down and saw a tiny tongue of flame spontaneously spring to life on the cloth. Jesus Christ, sputtered the EMT. He took a bottle of sterile water and sprayed a jet onto the sheet just as the ambulance screeched to a halt. And just like that, the fireball, the fire beast, was gone. Suddenly, a flood of medical personnel clawed at my gurney. I was barely aware of any of this as I floated and tumbled into a void. I knew I was in shock, that strange body hocus-pocus that can kill you without the need of a life-threatening injury. I bobbed in and out of consciousness while the medical team used forceps to pry fused clothing out of my body and scrubbed off dead flesh with brushes. They pumped me full of antibiotics and wrapped me in sterile bandages and compression sleeves and rested me on an air chamber bed. I was a magnet for a bacterial infection without my protective shell. They put me in a solitary intensive care room to see if I would make it through the night. The nurses turned off the lights. A ventilator breathed for me, and the drugs pulled my eyelids shut. I fell asleep for a few moments before the pain returned so intensely that I couldn't breathe. I sat up in bed. The pain wrapped around my rib cage, thigh and lower arm, and even my neck, and it tugged. My seared flesh vibrated, and I could feel my bones pulling forward as if they were magnetized, called by forces outside of me. And that's when I saw the orange glow through the security glass in the closed room door. It flickered on the tiles on the hallway wall, the amber light intensifying. My wounds begged my body to reunite with what was in that hallway. This God loves to collect firefighters, I thought to myself, while I waited for my visitor to arrive. I was breathing pure oxygen. The end would come in a flash. It was not until I could see the flaming ember of the helmet in the window that I noticed the other figures in my room. There were a dozen silhouettes between my bed and that door. As the fiery beast turned to enter my room, the crew closed ranks and formed a defensive line. The darkness couldn't conceal that these shadow figures wore turnout bunkers and helmets. Each held a fireman's axe at the ready. Suddenly, the immolated entity hesitated outside the door. It stood there and gazed at the security glass, a wall of flame behind its air mask. Everything was still. The fire creature raised its fists in rage and arched back as if to scream. Coals billowed out of the dangling air hose of the mask, and flames brightened in intensity around the collar of its jacket. The orange glow illuminated the room enough for me to see that the firefighter at the center wore a white leather battalion chief helmet. He advanced to the door and held his axe, ready to swing. The axe head was jet black and seemed to absorb the light from the flames. The chief stared out at the effigy firefighter. "Let our brother go," he said. The fire creature placed a gloved palm on the door window, and the metal wire within the security glass began to glow orange. The other men in the room moved forward, readying for battle. The security window squeaked and warped and fell out of the frame, and the beast's gloved hand reached for the battalion chief's sleeved arm. As soon as it grabbed hold, the chief clamped his glove on its flaming wrist and pulled back with all his might, trapping the arm momentarily against the window frame. Another firefighter advanced, swung down his axe, and hit the beast at the elbow joint. The matte black axe head cleaved through the thick fabric as if it were dandelion tufts. Almost immediately, the amputated arm extinguished. The flames disappeared into the infinite darkness of the axe head like stars into a black hole. And, God help me, I shrieked out in pain as if the blade struck me. The empty sleeve and glove flopped to the floor tiles. The creature withdrew its cauterized stump and stared at it for a moment. The firefighters in my room rocked forward, ready to swing at will. But instead, the creature slowly backed away from the doorway. It paced like a tiger, bristling to find a way inside, and everyone stood utterly still. It wasn't afraid. It was patient. Finally, the demon loped backward down the hall, never looking away from us. As it moved back, the throbbing of my burns became so intense I moaned through the respirator tube. The creature stopped next to an electrical wall outlet near the floor and pressed its boot vamp to it. The lights throbbed on for a split second, and then the hospital blacked out. When the emergency lights came on in the hallway, the beast was gone. It left behind a melted outlet plate and a burn mark the shape of a V on the wall above it. Nobody turned around to see if I was okay. Some men left the room to search for any fires left as calling cards. Others gave all their attention to their leader. The battalion chief reached down and picked up the severed coat sleeve and glove with tender care. "Was that him?" the axe-swinging firefighter asked as he looked at the objects. The chief nodded sadly and pulled back the glove's cuff to reveal a name written in marker. "We'll get him back," said the chief. Another firefighter appeared with a wooden box, shaped like a footlocker but covered with hand-carved filigree. The box had a radiant purple lining. It contained a badge with a black mourning stripe over the number, a set of alarm box keys, a pair of collar insignia, and a smiling photo of a young firefighter in his dress blues. The battalion chief folded the charred sleeve like a liturgical vestment and placed it gently, lovingly into the case. He did the same with the glove, closed the box, and put his hand on the lid for the moment of silent prayer. And then he turned to me for the first time. What caught my eye was the necklace of firefighter badges that he wore around his neck. Each badge was from a different department, different eras. Some were bronze, copper, some steel. They all had black mourning strips over the numbers. Other than that, the chief had no personal markings on his bunkers. He had no nameplates or department call letters. The only other symbol was a jet black Maltese cross on his vintage white leather helmet. The next thing I noticed was the thick, shiny scar tissue of severe burns which covered most of his face. His left ear had melted into a stub. I looked at the other firefighters who were now busy nailing old iron keys over electrical outlets and drawing the 8 points of the Maltese cross over doorways and windows. Each man wore the war paint of burn scars. I grew dizzy and weak. The battalion chief noticed, and he held out a jet black fireman's badge in his flame-scarred hands. "This will protect you and keep you," he said as he looped the chain over my head and around my neck. The badge was heavy. It wasn't made of metal. It was stone. I felt the electricity in my body shut off, and I plunged into darkness. I woke to find my room stuffed with flower arrangements and get-well cards and balloons. I was off the respirator, but my throat was raw from the intubation. I looked over at the door. The safety glass was intact. I had no idea how many days had passed. My assistant chief sat on the chair next to the bed, absently running his fingers over his turtleneck of old red scar tissue. He watched me with a mixture of relief and sorrow. I looked away from him to the flowers on the windowsill, and that's when I saw the iron key hammered over the wall outlet. "They came to you, didn't they?" he said, his eyes fixed at my chest. I looked down and saw the black stone badge resting on me. "They came to me too back then," he said, "but I couldn't. They asked for too much." He wanted to know more, but I told him that I couldn't remember anything, so he would stop asking me questions. There was no point in a discussion, because if you were called, you either answer the call or you don't. See, this God collects firefighters, cursing their souls to an eternity enslaved by the monster they died fighting, forced to trap and kill their brother firefighters. I narrowly escaped death, and that fire bit too deep for me to keep my old life. I was forever changed, transformed. I touched the black shield on my chest, my soul catcher, my talisman, obsidian, the glassy stone born of dying lava. It was also my passport. After visiting hours and lights out, I knew that night they would return. I would meet them with a clear heart and sound mind when they laid out the choice for me. They would ask me if I would dedicate myself to the rescue of my fallen brothers from the fire, just as the Knights of Hospitallers did on the island of Malta all those centuries ago. They would ask me if I were willing to sacrifice everything. The choice was simple, and after all this time, I still have no regrets. The battle still rages on, as it always will. But there is no higher calling than to serve. We give ourselves to service. Thank you for listening, and happy Halloween, everybody. And thanks for listening to the show. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can find more on our website, hellbentforhorror.com, and I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/hellbentforhorror, and my Twitter handle is hellbenthorror. Please hit that subscribe button to get H4H hot off the press. And if you can do a review on iTunes or whatever app you listen to us on, that really helps people get to find us. And now for some Hellbent for Horror news. The podcast is available on some more outlets now, so you can listen to H4H on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and TuneIn Radio, as well as the regular iTunes, Android, and Amazon apps. And let there be swag. H4H t-shirts are now on sale. We have a store on tpublic.com with a bunch of Hellbent for Horror designs, and you can have your choice of t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, something horrible beautiful for you or that someone special. The link to the merchandise store is on our website, hellbentforhorror.com. And until we meet again, stay hellbent.